Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm Korey Gunz, along with wrestling insider Tom Colohue. Tom, it's only been a couple of days since our last podcast, but man, do we have enough to talk about tonight.
Oh yeah, it seems like it's busy as hell. There's been a lot going on in wrestling, but I suppose leading up to WrestleMania season, that's to be expected.
Definitely, and we're going to start on maybe a little bit of a negative note. Maybe it's the type of attention that the WWE would prefer not to have right now leading into WrestleMania. If you were following social media in the past 24 hours, The Miz was a guest on WWE Backstage on Tuesday night, and apparently one of his comments caught the ire of one CM Punk, who sent out a tweet that I'm not even going to try to quote or even paraphrase here on the show, but suffice to say it was not PG. I'm sure you can even still now go online, go on Twitter and find screenshots of it. Of course, it has since been deleted, the actual tweet, but I'm sure you can still find it on screenshots and the like out there. Like I said, definitely not a PG-related tweet from CM Punk. We know that the WWE hired him probably for his controversial nature, but I have to think that this maybe oversteps that boundary by quite a bit, actually. Is this a legit story? Are we going to hear the typical "I got hacked" excuse? What's the deal with CM Punk and his tweet regarding or directed at The Miz?
It is genuinely hard to tell, primarily because The Miz is involved. If it was just CM Punk and anyone else, I would believe 100% that this is legitimate. However, it's The Miz. Do you remember his whole feud with Bryan, how that started on Talking Smack? I wasn't sure whether or not that was real. Nobody was sure whether or not that was real. This is the patron saint of inside and outside kayfabe at the same time. The Miz is tremendous at this stuff. And when you look at the clip which supposedly inspired the tweet, that looks like Miz being The Miz. Little jab, little bit of ire, little bit of self-belief. Now, there are two things we know about CM Punk. One, he does not do PG tweets. This is a man who posted a tweet saying he, shall we say, defecated, I'm being polite here, in a wrestling ring, and to encourage people to retweet that tweet. So he does not do PG tweets. What he also doesn't do is delete tweets. That's an interesting thing for me. That's what makes me think it might be pretty real.
Yeah, I would have to, to me, I agree with you when you see on the Miz's end what drew the tweet from CM Punk. I agree that I think that was just kind of The Miz, being entertaining. But the tweet from CM Punk was definitely with the language that he used, and as you said, the fact that he deleted it, which I think probably if he wasn't employed by the WWE right now, maybe that tweet doesn't get deleted.
Just quickly, he is employed by Fox. He's not employed by WWE.
Excuse me, yeah, you're correct. Which probably makes it probably even more serious, because with the way that he at least at one time felt about WWE, maybe he'd have been more inclined to leave it up if he was employed by them as opposed to Fox. So yeah, that's a good clarification to make. But like I said, with the language that was used in that tweet, I just can't imagine that was just simply a Fox saying, "Hey Punk, go tweet something controversial to draw some attention to yourself or to the network." I would have to think that was not what they had in mind if that was the case.
Yeah, it's the most genuine CM Punk tweet you will ever see in your life. That is just CM Punk being CM Punk, and I'd imagine he's still sat at home right now proud of it.
It would definitely be an interesting situation to watch, not only to see if there's any type of response from Fox or the WWE. Like I said, even though he's not employed by the WWE itself, obviously Fox and the WWE have a pretty important relationship, so I got to believe Vince McMahon would probably not be too happy with some of the verbiage that was used in that tweet. So, but that's what, you hire CM Punk, and maybe that's a little bit of you get what you pay for, and so we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see going down the line. Let's move on now to some contract discussion. CM Punk may be a guy that his contract may be a little bit up in the air at this point. And another team that we've heard a lot of contract talk about is the Revival. And they seem to be a team that always seem to pop up in these type of discussions. They had this type of ordeal not too long ago, about a year ago, talking about, their contracts were going to expire. Were they going to resign? Were they going to go to AEW? And now we seem to be right back where we were once again with the Revival. What can you tell us about their current contract situation? Maybe some things that they're looking for as incentives to sign some new contracts. What can you give us as far as the latest on the Revival and their relationship with the WWE right now?
Yeah, this is something I obviously wanted to bring up because I do have updates. I want to clarify a little bit an update that I already gave. So the idea was that in January last year, the Revival asked for their release. That was the idea. However, they have since, to Matty Paddock, who was writing for The Mirror and now writes for Sportskeeda, they've said to him in an interview that was blown way out of proportion, which seems to be the case. When you look at some of the examinations and the sources for this information, there's a lot of talk about the Revival being unhappy, but very few voices actually saying that they have requested a release. So that does make sense based on what they are saying. Now, their concerns at the time were that the tag divisions weren't being taken seriously and that they weren't being utilised particularly well, and that no tag teams were being utilised particularly well. This wasn't just them concerned about themselves and their career, this was them worried about tag team wrestling by and large. The WWE listened, and the WWE tried to invoke changes. When you look at the SmackDown tag team roster right now, we talked about this last week, it is a very strong roster. It is a very strong group. I say last week, I don't know when this is going up, it's probably not quite last week. But it's very strong now, and the WWE believe that it is strong enough to have assuaged the fears that the Revival had. That's what they believe, and that's why they are now in a position, since I made my report, we're now starting to hear ideas that more contract offers have been made to the Revival to bring them in. Numbers that have been quoted are quite high. The Revival certainly have been able to raise their stature considerably, and we're looking at contracts which would be very lucrative for the Revival. But we'll have to wait and see, because at the moment they haven't agreed to sign anything, and in fact, given that their contracts end at different times, it would be very interesting because one person would have to be on the shelf for a while waiting for the other person's non-compete clause to run out before they could go anywhere else. Personally, I still think they will sign on again. I do think enough has been done, similar to what the WWE management believe, and I do think they are in a much better place in themselves now.
There's been a rumor going around that a potential matchup at the Royal Rumble would pit the Revival up against Harlem Heat, of all people, Booker T and Stevie Ray, and Booker T is seemingly somewhat kind of sort of confirmed that report, or has dropped hints that maybe he's just kind of waiting for the word go from the WWE that this match is going to happen. And you talked about how important the tag team ranks seem to be for the Revival, the fact that they want to make tag team wrestling a big part of the product and kind of want to bring it back to prominence. Could this match, whether it happens or not, in any way affect whether the Revival sign new contracts, or affect in the way that they think that the WWE perceives them and tag team wrestling, and thus therefore maybe affect their decision about whether to re-up with the WWE or not?
It is a bit of a carrot on a stick at the moment, and I spoke in the last podcast about when contracts come up, you tend to see someone get a brief push right before they sign because they've been promised something to entice them to sign. This seems like it would be it. Booker T is certainly very enthusiastic. It would be a very classical tag team match, exactly the sort of environment the Revival thrive in. Stevie Ray is a bit of a wild card here. We're not sure where he is when it comes to this match. He has not come out and said he's behind it. To my knowledge, obviously, he would need to get back into the rhythm. I wouldn't necessarily say back into shape, because at the Hall of Fame he looked like he was in good shape. But is he ready for this match? I think that's a question that people need to ask a bit more. So we'll have to wait and see as to whether he agrees to the match. But everybody else is very keen on making this match happen. I think it will be very telling as to whether they have signed if this match happens. It doesn't necessarily have to happen at the Rumble after all.
Well, speaking of the Rumble, this past Monday night's episode of Raw definitely gave us some food for thought going into that event, and gave us some hints about maybe what we'll see going into January's pay-per-view. most importantly, and probably most surprisingly of all, was the revelation that Brock Lesnar, the WWE champion, is actually going to be in the Royal Rumble. And not only that, but he's going to enter at number 1. Now, this is not a Roman Reigns situation from a couple years past where Brock is actually defending the championship in the Rumble. That is not the case. He's simply entering the Rumble at number 1 and really opens the doors for a lot of possibilities storyline-wise. If you've looked on social media, a lot of people are already giving their picks about who it is that might eliminate Brock or who it is that might win the Rumble and who they'll challenge. And as a fan, I think that's what you want, is you want storylines and things developing that leave you wondering, where you can't completely guess, or predict what's going to happen. But I think this Brock thing is interesting. It's the first time we've ever seen, a current champion enter at number 1 and be in the Rumble. Is this strictly storyline purpose driven? Is there something in Brock's contract where, he wanted to be in the Rumble so he didn't have to work a 15, 20-minute match one-on-one? What can you tell us about this situation? When was the decision made to put Brock in the Rumble as opposed to having him defend the championship? Shed some light on this situation from this past Monday night.
There is a lot at work here, and I do think this is one of the most clever moves they've done in a long time. Firstly, the winner of the Royal Rumble seems so set in stone and so obvious that this right here creates a lot of reasonable doubt. So it seemed certain that Roman Reigns was going to win the Royal Rumble. Now there are suddenly a lot more interesting options. That little bit of a wild card, that little bit shaking it up, that's interesting to me. I do still think Roman will win, but this is an interesting thing. They could play this in so many ways. You could have Brock Lesnar run through the first 10 participants getting heat, and then Keith Lee walks out and eliminates him in 20 seconds. That's just a random example, but how over would Keith Lee be if that happened? You could also have that with Drew McIntyre, with Rusev, with Volta. You have every option under the sun. What is most likely to happen is going to be Cain Velasquez, but we are where we are on that one. I have mentioned in a previous report for Sportskeeda that the initial plan was for the Royal Rumble to feature another Cain Velasquez match, or at least Cain Velasquez would still be competing with Lesnar at some point. There was a bit of a loss of faith in Velasquez, so that could be at play here. However, we could still see Cain Velasquez be the one eliminating him and being given more time to develop as a performer leading into a WrestleMania match. Because trainers have worked with him, they do plan to work with him and bring him up to speed, as it were, depending on how long his contract actually is. It wasn't just for one match, so we'll have to wait and see there. But all in all, it adds so much potential extra drama, and there was originally going to be a Brock Lesnar match at the Royal Rumble. You can guarantee that. You look at last year, WWE Championship match, Universal Championship match, both women's championship matches, they were dead set. Everything else is in place. We've got the Universal Championship match, we've got the Raw and SmackDown Women's Championship matches. The only one missing is the WWE Championship match. So something went awry. Something has gone wrong in there. And there are a number of possibilities as to who might have been the opponent planned, who became unavailable, either a different storyline took off, or they decided not to have that. I still think there's a possibility it could have been Ricochet who was in that position, and he just didn't get as over as they wanted him to. It could be so many different options. But I think I'm very happy with the choice they've made. And when it comes to the idea that this is a Brock Lesnar decision, this is the least Brock Lesnar decision you will ever hear. Brock Lesnar's character is lazy, unwilling to work, unwilling to turn up. He's just said, I'll go first, I'll wrestle for an hour, I'll wrestle 29 people and still win. That's not a Brock Lesnar decision. That is a Paul Heyman decision.
I've got two things I want to kind of throw out there on this. First of all, I think having Cain Velasquez, if he's the guy, if he's the payoff for this, the guy to come out and eliminate Brock, I think that would be the biggest waste of this storyline that they could have, just because they've already done something kind of like that when he first showed up with Rey. He showed up, he made Brock Lesnar powder out, like you got the big pop, then you got the match. So this would, to me, having him show up and then eliminate him and set up a match between those two at WrestleMania would be basically kind of the same thing they've already done. And I'm also not super enthused or looking forward to another Cain Velasquez-Brock Lesnar match. So I hope that they continue to be a little bit more creative like they have with this angle and it not be Cain Velasquez. That's just one fan's point of view. But another thing I thought about, and I even talked to Gary Cassidy about this on Twitter just the other day, was that, it seems to be a lot of people think that, well, what they're going to do is the winner of the Rumble is going to be a SmackDown star, say a Roman Reigns. That's who's going to fight The Fiend, and whoever it is that eliminates Brock Lesnar is going to be the challenger for the Raw. So boom, after the Royal Rumble, we have our two main events for WrestleMania set up. So my thought was, why not make Brock last till the final two? Whoever it is that's at the end with him eliminates Brock, and so, okay, you've set up that Raw brand WWE Championship match between Brock and whoever it is that eliminates him, because then you've still got, between Rumble and WrestleMania, you've still got about 2.5 months of TV to fill, so that would allow SmackDown to actually build up a challenger for The Fiend on their program, in their weekly television program. So my thought was, why waste and give away two WrestleMania main events in one show when you can set up one and then save the other for those 2.5 months of TV that you still need to fill up?
I like what you're saying here. I like it as an idea, but I think if they're going to do that, it would definitely end as Lesnar and Reigns in the ring. Because you've got to remember, Roman Reigns, despite being a face now and being very popular, still gets booed every now and then. And if he's going to win the Rumble, there will be a sizable contingent of the fan base who are going to boo him. But if Brock Lesnar has been in that whole match and thrown out person after person after person and face after face after face, thrown out Owens, thrown out Rusev, thrown out all the popular people, throw Bryan in there and throw him out. Why not? It's going to be effective. Throw CM Punk in there for 20 seconds, throw him out. Throw Edge in there. Throw everyone who's popular in there. Have Lesnar eliminate them and then finish with Reigns eliminating him. You might be able to get Roman cheered. You might. But there's a wondrous selection of possibilities there. I kind of have a secret guilty hope that Dominic Mysterio will eliminate him because that's just going to be funny. But yeah, the fact that there are so many options really adds a lot of intrigue to this match. It's a very, very clever move.
Yeah, it can only be a positive from a creative standpoint. I think, like you said, that fans can't call what's going to happen a month out from the event, and that's what we have here. So it definitely has me interested, and I think it's shaping up to be a really good Rumble, especially with the amount of stars that are going to be in it. It's, looking at the field, like I said, we're not going to get into it. Well, I'm sure we'll do a preview show as well leading up to it, but should be a really stacked Rumble as far as the number of names that are in it and the number of names that would make sense to actually come out and win it. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's talk about someone else. You mentioned Dominic Mysterio possibly being someone to eliminate Brock in the Rumble. Well, his proud father, Rey Mysterio, was on Raw. Came up a little bit short in his match with Andrade for the U.S. Championship. The match had a little bit of a confusing finish, a little bit of a convoluted finish. I'm not exactly sure if that really went off the way that it was intended, but it does appear that feud is probably going to continue on, at least for a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised to see those two, Mysterio and Andrade, go at it at the Rumble for the United States Championship. But, what are we seeing as far as Rey Mysterio, as his career as a whole? He re-signed with the WWE, and I think a lot of people saw that as kind of the one last hurrah, the one final run for him. Now, obviously, again, his son Dominic has been introduced into storylines, and we know that Rey has talked about that he wants to see Dominic in a WWE ring and that he is an aspiring wrestler. So what can you tell us about Rey Mysterio here leading into WrestleMania? Could this be kind of the one final run for Mysterio as far as a full-time main roster player, heading into WrestleMania, and then what could maybe his future hold after the big event?
Well, this is the final run. Rey has been quite open about that. He cut a promo a few weeks ago, maybe months ago now, to be fair. They've tried a couple of different pushes with Dominic Mysterio, but a bit of bad luck. Rey getting injured, goes off TV. A few weeks, few months, I'm not entirely sure when it was, but there was a promo in which he said he was going to retire and then he was talked out of it by his son. That's something that literally happened. It's sort of, art imitating life, I should say, whereby he did plan to retire and his son talked him out of it because his son wants to wrestle with his dad. And when you look at the Brock Lesnar storyline, that was definitely a way of getting Dominic Mysterio a little more over. Rey is now talking about Dominic all the time, every promo, keeping Dominic Mysterio, who has not been through NXT, who has not been through the usual systems, but is actually quite over already, despite never having wrestled a match. So it's working. Since coming back, Rey's been on a mission to put people over. Andrade is sort of his pet project, as it were. He's been working very hard for, I think, more than a year now to make Andrade look as good as possible. And he's been doing a fantastic job because he sees Andrade as the next generation of what he was, which is a very good thing and I think very accurate. The finish with the mask is very telling because, as we know, masks are incredibly important in that culture. But as part of wrestling, you always go out on your back. A mask being taken off is certainly a way to do that. So this could be leading towards that, but it also shows Rey Mysterio is wrapping up. I don't think we're far off seeing a retirement angle come into play. I am starting to hear that WrestleMania may be his last hurrah, but I think he definitely wants to see Dominic Mysterio wrestle either alongside him or be in his corner for a match before he goes. We spoke about contracts and what convinces people to sign on. Rey Mysterio was wrestling for New Japan. He was too expensive for the WWE. Clearly they managed to convince him somehow. It's very telling that we've seen a lot of Dominic since.
It's interesting that you brought up the mask, and I'm glad you did because I wanted to ask you about that. Of course, longtime fans will know that, Rey Mysterio has had his mask removed or lost his mask before in WCW. So we've seen him, wrestle and be a character in a company without his mask. But that when he came back to WWE, he's had it, and really he's had it since. And by all accounts, from what we've heard, he wasn't really too happy about losing the mask in the first place in WCW. If this is his last run, do you think that his quote-unquote retirement will include him losing his mask maybe in his final match? Or do you think that if that's the case, would it hurt him if he ever did want to do some one-offs? Maybe he did want to, take a payday in Japan or maybe in Mexico. Do you think that if he did lose the mask, that may hurt his drawing power in those other countries for some of those big one-off paydays if he no longer has the mask?
I think it would hurt his drawing power, but I don't think it would be a big issue for him personally. I do think he's in a position now whereby he's happy with his career. He's extremely happy with everything he's done, and he's moving on at this point. So I think taking the mask off will be that move on moment. And it may be that he loses his mask to a stronger opponent in Andrade. It may be that he retires the mask. It may be that one day he takes it off and he hands it to his son, sort of a ceremonial passing of the torch. It's true that he did not like having to give up his mask previously. It was not his choice. And I think there's also a few extra things in play when you consider that if he took the mask off, he would look younger than the son he stands next to. So we'll see. I see him taking the mask off in some capacity as his way of saying it is over now. I think it's only very certain talents that keep the mask on, and that is their choice. I think Rey respects his side of the culture, which is slightly different to, it's not an overall everyone says keep or everyone says get rid of the mask. There are differences and nuances in it, and I think he personally would want to remove the mask.
Last thing I want to touch on regarding this past Monday's Raw was the big return of the Big Show. We haven't seen him in a while. He returns to partner up with Kevin Owens and Samoa Joe against Seth Rollins and the AOP. And to everyone's surprise, he hadn't turned heel by the time he walked down the aisle, which was a big surprise to me that he walked through the curtain as a face, and I thought that by the time he got to the ring apron, he probably would have turned heel.
No. What happened was, as he was walking down the ramp, he turned heel, but then by the time he got to the ring apron, he turned face again.
Oh, okay. I must have missed it. Or maybe I just didn't care like his other 20 turns that he's had. But Big Show returns, looks in great shape, and actually I thought had a really good showing. Caught Rollins with the big right hand, which I thought Rollins sold great. That was probably one of the best sells of that big just right hand knockout punch that I've seen somebody take. So we've got the show back on Raw. Was this just a ratings boost, just kind of a surprise for the fans? Do we expect to see Big Show be a regular on TV? Is he another guy that's maybe getting one last push and one last run heading up into WrestleMania? What can you tell us about the former Giant's big return on Raw?
There's no plans for a WrestleMania match yet. I don't believe that he wants to have a match at WrestleMania. As far as the Big Show is concerned, he's come in to put people over. And yes, he may have been made to look good this Monday night on Raw, but that's important in order to put other people over. Because if nobody cares about you, no one's going to care about who you're putting over. He's not here to be there wrestling every week. He's not going to do that. We are seeing a changing of the guard in the WWE at the moment. He passed so much on to Braun Strowman, as did people like Mark Henry. And he wants to put people over. He'll be putting the AOP over more than anything, which is important in the steps that they're taking. And every now and then it's just nice to have that nostalgia pop for someone who can still go, who can still have a surprise without impacting on other storylines. Because if you had someone like Aleister Black as a tag team partner, you're impacting the Buddy Murphy storyline, and Aleister Black might have had to take a loss. So there are so many things at play. This was just a way to pop the crowd, show that the AOP are being taken seriously, because when you have someone that big and you have people like Samoa Joe and Kevin Owens, they're a very big team, and it looks good on people like AOP and in fact on Seth Rollins, even though Rollins did get a little bit beat up. No plans for a WrestleMania match at the moment. He may appear in the Royal Rumble though.
Last topic for the night, and as me and Tom are recording this, it is Wednesday evening, so we're getting ready to have and watch the latest edition of NXT versus AEW. We're back to business as usual with the Wednesday Night Wars now that the holiday season is over, and we've got some of those best of and clip shows from NXT out of the way. We're back to one-on-one action between the two brands on Wednesday nights. What can you tell us about, now we're in 2020. This is kind of effectively tonight would probably what I would maybe consider like the kind of the season premieres for both shows. Like I said, with the new year and the new season, we've got all those holiday specials out of the way. So, we've got NXT and AEW back going head to head. What do you think we can expect for this upcoming year of 2020? And also, will AEW, do you think that they'll do anything to counteract the WWE's, WrestleMania season?
Ooh, that is a very good question. We're now at a point whereby we're going back to business as usual, as you say. It's a reset. It's not just the win-loss records from AEW that's being reset and also not being reset, which is confusing because you have win-loss records for total and for the year. It's very confusing. I don't think they really thought all of that one through. But now we get to see, because it's been a few months now, AEW has bedded in. Their initial high has been tempered quite a bit and come down to a more sort of realistic level. They did not manage to convince all of the jaded former WWE fans to come back, but they did build themselves a very nice, carve out a nice piece of the pie for their audience. So I'll be interested to see what they do come out with. I don't think we're going to see many more episodes on either which have that versus feeling, like starting with an NXT title match. I don't think we're going to see much more of that. I think everything will be a bit more settled now. They're competition, but they don't really impact each other's bottom line all that much. It's not like it used to be. So I'm not sure AEW will be that reactive. When it comes to WrestleMania season, we'll have to wait and see. I do believe they're going to have to do something, but it depends how NXT is used during WrestleMania season. If there are NXT matches on the WrestleMania card, there's really not much AEW can do. They can't go to the same city and, throw on a show to compete with WrestleMania. It's WrestleMania. You are fighting a losing battle. So I'm not sure what they can do, but at the same time, that's part of the excitement of being a wrestling fan. We'll have to wait and see what the ratings are. I do think NXT is now in a much more comfortable position, but AEW can get it back with some good storytelling.
During around WrestleMania season, we always seem to see the ratings usually go up, a tick or two. Not nothing major, but we do usually see them come up on a little bit of a rise leading up to WrestleMania. Do you think that NXT may kind of get that WrestleMania bump, that just because they are the third brand and they're on television now, that, along with Raw and SmackDown, they'll kind of get that extra bump along with the other shows just because it is WrestleMania season? We may not have an NXT match at the event, but just kind of getting caught up in the whirlwind of WrestleMania season. And also to that point, could we maybe see AEW, would they be best served to maybe just kind of ride the wave, and just because during WrestleMania time people are interested in wrestling on television and they're a wrestling show on television, so maybe they draw some extra viewers just because they happen to be a wrestling promotion that is on cable TV?
For AEW, it's very much a ride the tide moment. Just, keep it steady, keep on going, because I don't think they will themselves see much of a bump, but at the same time, they won't see much of a drop at a certain point of the year either, because the WWE is very cyclical. It comes to January and then it starts to build, and you get up to WrestleMania and it peaks. And then they manage to keep it going for a couple of weeks. Usually there's a draft or a superstar shake-up that keeps things going. And then by May, they're the worst ratings there's ever been, and wrestling journalists are going crazy, and fans are saying, it's a death. It's the worst year they've ever had. The ratings are so low. No, the WrestleMania buzz has wore off. That's just what happens. And then the same thing happens around November, December time. It's the worst ratings ever. Everything's terrible. It's the worst non-holiday show. It's all bad. WWE is failing. No, it's just the boring time before the Royal Rumble. Same thing happens every single year. Every single year they break new records for low rate. That's how TV goes at the moment. So AEW won't have those peaks and troughs, but I think NXT definitely will, because of its connection and the fact that it probably is going to get WrestleMania coverage. A lot of that's media coverage. Media coverage basically saying, look, we're building up to WrestleMania, let's cover more wrestling, more mainstream channels, the use of celebrities, the appeal to casuals. AEW does not appeal to casuals. Part of their modus operandi is to not appeal to casuals. So we won't see that spike, we won't see that drop. They should be moderately steady now, but really the risk is when it comes to retention rate, because NXT will still get that bump. They could, if they're putting on good shows and getting good exposure, they could take some views from AEW, because AEW gets that level of exposure from the media all year round.
Not that they really need it, but how great would it be if Vince McMahon just backed up the Brinks truck to Turner Broadcasting and bought ad time for WrestleMania during an AEW show?
See, here's the thing. AEW have had advertisements during WWE shows. You'll be watching Raw or SmackDown and then there'll be an ad for AEW in there. It has happened, and fans thought that was hilarious. If WWE did that during AEW, it would be bad sportsmanship. So I think Vince will stay well clear, but I would laugh so hard.
Well, we appreciate Tom giving us another good show of insight and news. Make sure that you guys are following him on Twitter at Colohue for all the latest updates. And Tom, I can tell you he's always working. So like I said, the news and stuff that you hear here on the show, it's 24/7 coverage over on his Twitter account. So make sure that you are following him. If you'd like to throw me a follow on Twitter, I'm at Korey Gunz. Make sure that you subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. Give us a like on our podcast episodes. Share it with your friends. Give us your comments, your feedback. We'd love to hear them, but we especially appreciate you tuning in and would appreciate you giving us a like and subscribe over there. And also, you can catch out all the wrestling coverage over on Sportskeeda.com on the daily as well. We appreciate you joining us and listening in, and we will see everybody next time on the next edition of Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda.